So tonight on the Active Travel Cafe, we will start with our usual crowdsourced news. And following that, we are delighted to have Professor Greg Marsden here from the Institute of Transport Studies at the University of Leeds. And he's going to discuss the InFuZe project. And he's talking about imagining a city where you don't need to own a car. So really looking forward to that. But before the talk, I wonder if anyone has anything that they would like to share. David.
Just very briefly, because it's been in the national news, so you probably all know about it, but Birmingham is certainly not a city where, well, you can manage without a car, but it's really quite difficult. Trains don't run on time, the buses are cutting congestion, and we're now backpedaling on active travel, as you probably know. Adam Tranter's post hasn't been filled. They've just advertised 2 commissioner roles, one on road safety, which I suspect is the sort of thing that Bob Davis has been campaigning against, and the other on active travel. They're 1 day a week each, and they get an honorarium of 10,000 quid, which is more generous than it was originally, but it looks like it's for somebody to fit it in with an existing role, to be honest. I can't see them having much influence on either councillors or officers across the West Midlands region. And then, as you probably know, it's all been on telly. Birmingham has decided, after many years of tolerating cycling in the vehicle restricted areas, which are quite substantial in Birmingham, to ban cycling. At least they're consulting on it. It goes back to concern about electric motorbikes and delivery riders, and we're going to discuss that in a couple of weeks, which I'm pleased about. But it really is a major step backwards. Some of the routes have been taken over now by the tramways, which you're not supposed to cycle on, although delivery riders with fat tires do quite confidently. It's just going to make the city centre even more impermeable for cyclists if they get away with it, and force you onto very dangerous roads that around the city centre. So, I mean, it's bad news all around, but you've had 10 years of the Birmingham cycling revolution, which is nowhere near complete, and they're backpedaling already. And I've got a picture of me and the deputy leader of the council cycling across Victoria Square in the rain for sometime in the mid-2000s, 2006, I think, quite happily.
Thank you. I'm really sorry to hear that. Yeah, I think it's really looking gloomy, but hopefully not for long. Hopefully things will change for the better. I know there's a lot of very good campaigning going on in Birmingham, so surely that's going to make a difference. Mark.
Yeah, just to say that Brighton's work on Valley Gardens has started. I see Becky's here as well from Brighton. So many years in the running. So this is Valley Gardens 3. If you know Brighton, Palace Pier roundabout there, which Phil Jones and I did, or Phil did a thing in these times over 10 years ago. So there are actually barriers and work starting there, but Brighton's doing its also non-strategic thing. And I did have a question for David. You've been posting historic documents. And I wondered if we should all, I've got loads of historic documents. I wondered if we should all start posting our historic documents with comments from 20, 30 even years ago, and commenting on them. So maybe that's a thing we should bring them out for a future meeting. And also we got Laura speaking on Thursday on her book in Brighton. So if any of you, there are still some tickets left if any of you want to come.
Thank you, Mark. As somebody who's been looking at the kind of history of city planning, and I'm all for people sharing their historic documents. We've used them to quite good effect here, pointing at things that have happened in the past, or promises, or complaints.
Sally, is there somewhere we can leave them and give them to as a central repository? Because it just strikes me.
Let's have a conversation about this, Mark, separately. But yeah, I would love to talk about that. Yeah. Adam, do you want to go?
Yeah, this one's there's quite a lot happening in Bath, North East Somerset. So the first thing they announced was the Bath Walking, Wheeling, Cycling Links, or I'm just calling it Bath Links, which is effectively about 4 or 5 different cycle schemes which are being funded through the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. The more interesting thing about that is that the public consultation they've gone out with, they've already stated that for timing issues, they got it out early as a preliminary consultation without taking it through Active Travel England's design assurance process, which they're still going to do. So WECA have kind of started partnering with Active Travel England to kind of help get that. So that's quite useful, because it's not down to just ourselves to go in and say, oh, you know, us as vocational sort of transport people coming in. We're now hopefully going to get a strong voice from Active Travel England looking at those schemes and bringing them up to a certain standard. And also, and part of one of those implied within it was actually another low traffic neighborhood, which is great to see. So they're basically using that sort of approach of removing traffic rather than building cycling infrastructure, which is, to me, is always much better. And then the other thing as well is there was a legal challenge to a low livable neighborhood. They've now started, and that then went through, but the council didn't challenge it, but they resubmitted their ETRO with all the correct descriptions that they're apparently missing, and now that's being implemented right now. I think today and tomorrow it should be finished, and so the whole of the area inside Bath at the circus and around the Royal Crescent, all of that's now going to be part of a livable neighborhood. The only sad thing about that is some parts are, I think, weak. They're still allowing some through traffic in certain areas, rather than actually putting in a physical modal filter. And I think that will, but the ETRO gives us that opportunity, hopefully. And all of the kind of people that I work are very aware that they've been campaigning for this, are very aware of how ETROs work and the 6-month cycle for changes. Right, so there's a lot happening in Bath and North East Somerset at the moment.
Thank you, Adam. Roger, do you want to go next?
Great, thanks. This is just a plug, please, for the fact that the Transport Action Network, which is the parent organisation that hosts the Low Traffic Future Alliance, Transport Action Network is, as I'm pretty sure you will all be aware, challenging the legality of the previous government's cuts to the cycling walking budget. It has been unhelpfully claimed by other organisations that the cuts have been reversed. They haven't. And anyway, the process by which they were cut is still the point of law that needs to be challenged. We have been, a fortnight ago, we found out that we'd been given leave to appeal our original defeat in this case. We were originally defeated on it back in the summer. We've been granted leave to appeal. That was about 2 weeks ago, and the court has given us a stay of execution effectively to raise more funding. We've got another week to go. We started out with 12 grand needing to be raised in order to get to a total of 50. We've got through about 7 of it. We've got about a little under 5K still to go and a week in which to do it. If we don't manage, we will genuinely not be able to go ahead with the case. So it really is, please chip in, and please spread the word. I will pop the link in the challenge in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger. Ruth, you want to go next?
Hello. Yes, well, I'm very happy that getting to O2 is not going to be a problem. The strikes have just been called off, so very excited. I think most of us will know, though, that Lou Haig, who had promised great things for cycling, was probably leaned on by the Treasury because of her comments about P&O and other things, and the threat of being removed from post. So maybe it's the Treasury we all need to be having a pop at, rather than the nice new Minister for Transport. And my other news was, which I thought Roger might be mentioning, was that the APPG have started studying on these bikes, nefarious bikes. But even my own MP, Andy Slaughter, who's very nice, doesn't seem to understand the difference between an e-bike and these illegal motorbikes. So I'm desperately trying to educate him, like we all should be educating all our people. But the APPG is, for cycling and walking, are now already doing some kind of work on this. So something to look forward to, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. H, do you want to come in, Are you there? No. Oh, hang on a second. Will. Sorry, Will. I'm going to bring Will in. I didn't realise you were still there, Will. Sorry, I thought you put your hand up.
That's okay. I was actually putting my hand up because I can't see how to put my hand up on the screen.
Don't worry.
3 very quick items. One is Birmingham or anyone else is fighting PSPOs. There's a national group called the Manifesto Club that is also fighting PSPOs. So please speak to Josie Appleton there, and have a look. And also I've put my email address into the chat if anyone wants to contact me, because we had cyclists being fined all over the place for cycling on the road, on roads that they were supposed to cycle on, and also cycling through bollards and things like that. So and also one on a cycleway. So if anyone wants to contact me for that, we've got a meeting this week with Colchester Council, and we're still going to thrash it through. So that's one item. The second item is if anyone's thinking about doing an email newsletter, we've got it down pat at the moment. So if they want a sample of the email newsletters we're producing, please just email me. Third item is a slightly disturbing. We have a nearby critical mass to us, and we had a guy last week for the Halloween critical mass claiming to be with Colchester Cycling Campaign. It turned out he's a convicted paedophile. I'm not going to name him here, but again, if anyone locally, Cambridge, Norwich, Harlow, Chelmsford, wants to contact me, I'm quite happy to name him on a private channel. He's known for wearing a wolf's head. That's why we haven't got a picture of him. But we have rumbled him, and he is now barred from one particular critical mass. Okay, so that's about it.
Goodness, thank you, Will. Yeah, I mean, just again, I think on that kind of the subject of delivery riders and sort of converted bikes, we are going to have Izzy Romney from Possible, who's going to come talk about some work they've been doing about precarious workers and the need for safe cycling infrastructure, essentially for people who are already working in really pressurized conditions. And hopefully, you know, the debate needs to be around that, rather than just this kind of idea of just targeting the bike. H, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, there was you and yours today about deliveries going on, Royal Mail and such like, and it's commercial use of the public road, not just by e-mopeds or motorcycles, but also the van drivers who are Class B licence holders. They're not regulated either. So you attack this problem at source, because the vans are driven on footways, they're parked on pedestrian crossings, all sorts of stuff like that. The e-mopeds are illegally used, and nobody is actually tackling the employers. 30 years ago, Domino's Pizzas got bounced for $80 million because they actually nailed them for a crash that their driver, who was a gig worker, caused, and they were denying, oh, he's not an employee. And that's what we've got to take it back to source, and do that. Lou Haig is having some interesting fun with funding. I'd remind people that the entire UK rail network was built with private money and operated with private money until nationalisation. I'd refer people to Henry George, the raising of land values when you get a good service. So obviously, people pay for the railways because the railways improved their service to their factories. And the original railways were built for freight. The Kilmarnock and Troon opened in 1806 for freight, and it only ran its first scheduled passenger service in 1816. So, you know, we've got to think about how we generate money other than sort of saying it's out of the public purse. We get the money from the speculators who gain from all the public services that are going in, and then take the money away. And they should put that money back in to doing. I've got studies back from 1988 that show land value uplift, property value uplift through having a cycle route. And so they paid for the cycle route from the property development. And that's what we should be looking at, capturing that and feeding it in.
Yeah, well, that's a very long-running debate. Thank you, H. Right, yeah. I'm just going to take Anna, and then we're going to move on to our speaker tonight.
Hello. 20-mile-an-hour news. We've got a new innovation, which is a forum for local authorities thinking of introducing 20 miles an hour, and we're matching them up with people who are already doing it. So if you've got suggestions of officers and councillors you think might be interested in that, do let me know. I'll put my details in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That's great. Yes, please do that. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Lots of news tonight. So it is now time for the speaker slot of tonight's session. And we have Greg Marsden here. Greg, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Brilliant. Who's going to share that's sort of something from the InFuZe project with us? Do you want to share your slides, Greg, and I'll let you get going.
Have you got them the right way around now, Sally?
Oh, yes, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for inviting me. It's always nice to come to a group like this where you see so many people together who are trying to make a positive difference, which even though you're all talking about difficult challenges you face, that's really it's really rewarding. So I'm going to talk to you about a 5-year project which we're 3 months into now, called Inspiring Futures for Zero Carbon Mobility. It's funded by the Engineering Physical Sciences Research Council as a collaborative grant between ourselves at the University of Leeds, the Royal College of Art, and the Institute for Social Futures at Lancaster University. We've got a network of around 30 partner organisations from across government, the mobility sector and the third sector. And our overall goal is to explore the potential for transitions to post-car ownership futures. So this is not car-free, as I'll come on to later, but post-car ownership. And what we want to try and do is understand what people need from their transport system and what kind of system level change we would have to deliver to really enable much more of the population to move away from individualized car ownership. How do we start that process? Where do we start that process? And you can point to parts of the country where there's lots of this. So the middle of London, even some of the outskirts of London have lots of relatively low car dependent neighborhoods, but we can't replicate that elsewhere around the country, and we can't do it quick enough given the climate emergency we have. So that's kind of the motivation for what we're doing. And we're trying to generate a positive discussion. So our question is really about what better would need to look like in order for not owning your own individual car to be more appealing to more people. A lot of what we talk about in transport, in particular in relation to the climate crisis, is about traffic reduction, restriction, demand management. These are all about things we take away from people, and we need to have a discussion about what else you get back from a change in the way in which we access mobility. So I'll take you through to how we got there. I'm going to go even further back before 1804 railways construction, a bit of Greek mythology. This is where I feel we are in transport policy. So Sisyphus was somebody who didn't behave particularly well and annoyed the Greek gods. So they sentenced him to spend eternity wrestling a boulder up a steep hill. And every time as he just about got to the top, it would slip from his grasp, crash and roll back to the bottom. So his existence was a struggle of pointless eternal labor of pushing a boulder up a hill. And that kind of feels a little bit like where we are with transport policy, trying to make the alternatives to the car more attractive at the same time that we've had 15 years worth of real terms fuel duty cuts, essentially freezing or the 5p reduction, which makes the conditions for the alternatives that much more difficult. So we find ourselves continually trying to push this boulder up a hill, despite everyone's best intentions to make the alternatives more attractive to the car. Now, probably doesn't need saying to a group like this, but without addressing the level of ownership of cars in society, obviously we find ourselves with more and more places like this. Ian Walker's work on motonormativity and just how things which would have been difficult to imagine 20 or 30 years ago, like parking in some of the pictures you can see here, is just now standard practice in some parts of the country. I'd say it's endemic, and even the well-organised residents' parking schemes, like you see in the middle at the bottom there, lock off meaningful active travel interventions. The car has taken over the neighbourhoods. So why is this so difficult to change? Well, it's partly because we spend our time, most of our time, thinking about shifting journeys between cars and other modes. And it's, for me, partly the wrong question, because we spend £79 billion a year in the UK on just owning, maintaining and insuring vehicles, not moving them, just having them. That's 3 times what we spend on moving cars, and it's 14 times what we spend on public transport fares. So, and we don't treat that £79 billion in our decision making. It's a sunk cost. So it makes it really difficult for the alternatives to compete once people make the decision that they need to own a vehicle for whatever set of journeys or reasons they feel that's important to them. The ratio of ownership costs to use costs has gone up over time. In particular, recently, people have been buying bigger and more expensive vehicles, and car insurance costs have gone up. So we're spending relatively more on ownership than we are on use over time. And that makes policies which tackle use much more politicized, because people have spent more and more money on the ownership question. Electrification is going to make that equation even more imbalanced, because we know that particularly for those people who've got off-street parking, the use cost is going to fall. The ownership cost is yet to come down to parity with petrol vehicles. But I'm not going to be pessimistic, because we've written this project because we think there's an opportunity. We don't use our cars very much at all. So there is a chink in the armour. We spend £79 billion on something that we really don't make much use of. And I'm not going to argue that we should make everyone should be driving more in order to get better value for that money spending. My colleague Gillian Annable has done some work with the National Travel Survey. It shows that 1/3 of cars don't move on any given day. And in the morning peak on a Tuesday, it's about 14% of the vehicle fleet that's on the move. We've known for a long time they're stationary for, people debate, 95, 96% of the day. And we know the average occupancy of cars is really low, 1.2 in the peak, under 1.6 now overall. So there's the potential to give people access to cars when they need them without having to own them. We've got lots and lots of spare car capacity out there. Could that open up the possibility of far fewer cars being needed to service our mobility? If you were accessing those vehicles when you needed them, we could think about diversifying the fleet. So we could start to right-size vehicles for the journeys that we make. We know from people's experience of joining car clubs, they think they'll use the car club more than they actually do. You begin to make public transport, walking and cycling, the choice for some more of your journeys, because that's actually the logical choice when you haven't got your own individual car right outside the front door. So there's opportunities to reduce the size of the fleet and to change the size of the vehicles that we have in our towns and cities. The vast majority of our journeys are less than 35 miles in length. But when you buy a car, you buy it for all of the journeys that you might use it for, and you end up with a bigger car. So we think that if we can find a model where people can begin to access cars when they need them more, then this will open up a whole range of other alternatives. But we also know that the commercial models, the car club models, are very difficult to scale up outside of the middle of city centres, and they're actually really expensive on a per hour comparative basis if your car ownership car use isn't already really low. So we're looking at packages that might come together to deliver this alternative service. So our question isn't, can you live without your car? There have been some interesting experiments asking people to give up their car and see what that feels like. I'll say from somewhere like Leeds, if you ask people that question, they think you're meaning can you get by on the first bus? And they'll have a little laugh and wander off in the other direction. So our question is, what would a world where people didn't need to own their own cars look like? And so we're asking people to design that with us, partly to kind of depoliticize this. We're not dropping a solution on communities. We're asking communities to build that solution. We want it to be a positive exercise with them. One of the things we'll need to do is make them aware of all the different mobility options that are now becoming available that could become a package. I mean, public transport, walking and cycling are always going to be a fundamentally important part of that, but they aren't going to be enough for most people. So what are the other sets of services that could come together? How much of that is going to be community peer-to-peer based? We're beginning to do some interesting thinking about, for example, could social housing corporations play a role in coordinating some of these services? What's the role for demand responsive transport in some parts of our towns and cities? What's the role of employers in this? It's not just about individuals. This is about a city where you don't need to own a car. So what else would change rather than just the mobility system? I've said co-design is right at the heart of what we're doing. This is just I won't go into too much detail about this, but this is how we're organized. So we have a 5-year program of essentially listening to people, designing with them, testing real interventions, learning and repeating. And over the 5 years, we'll scale up in size to several hundred households by the end of it. And we've got various behavioral data collection, modeling tools to help us understand whether the services can really meet people's needs. And we're looking at this whole life emissions perspective rather than just focusing on in-use emissions. What will success look like is something people ask me, and the answer to that is you can't know if it really is co-design. But one of our challenges is to try and get people to think and imagine what they could gain from the system looking and operating differently. So this is one rendering which our colleagues at the Royal College of Art have done. What would you do with the space that was freed up? What if we could survive with half or even 2/3 the numbers of vehicles that we have on our streets at the moment? What would you do with that alternative space? Let's get people imagining that. This would be great maybe for walkability, but you can imagine alternative futures which design in greater use of cycling, etc. So on this, you can look at placemaking, you can look at the costs to the individuals, you can look at the quality of life from their neighbourhood, walkability, and the whole life emissions, and potentially resilience if we're looking at things like repurposing infrastructure from grey to green. So there's lots of different things that we're hoping might appeal to people. Our challenge is to get them imagining something better than the system that's right in front of them on the right-hand side of this picture now. So I think that's me. Happy to take questions, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Greg. Very inspiring. Wouldn't it be amazing? I think we've got quite a few questions, but I suppose I would start with how do we get to that though? How do we persuade politicians that that's a sort of vision that should be taken forwards?
So that's a great question, Sally, and it's one that we're really interested in taking the politicians with us on this. We think that one of the reasons why some of the things that might make sense to this kind of group don't have traction is because politicians don't really believe that there is an alternative to the dominance of the private car, and they're incredibly risk averse to that. So our question is, where can we find the communities that actually want this? We've got to try and motivate those communities to be positive, to make noise and say, no, actually, what we've got isn't working for us. This would be a preferable kind of solution. And we're not imagining that we're going to change the whole of Leeds. Like when they built the iPhone, they didn't try and you know, get everyone to have one straight away. They look for the early adopters. So where are the communities? What are the opportunities where this could work, so that we can begin to both grow the system, but also grow people's confidence in it.
Great, thank you. And so I'm going to just take questions from the chat. I'll do a couple from the chat and then we'll do a couple in person. Tom asks, what impact does advertising have on car purchase and use?
Well, I think we have to be humble in recognizing that this is 8 million, which is probably what's spent on car advertising in the time that I started talking to the time I finished talking. So, you know, clearly car manufacturers are pushing vehicles all the time, and more expensive, bigger vehicles. I think that works for part of the market. So Gillian Annable, who's one of the research team, has done a lot of work on segmentation. And for 20 to 25% of the population, a car is part of their identity. You know, in the same way that we've got a very strong interest in cycling in this group, there'll be another room that's full of car enthusiasts, and it's not for us to challenge that. But there are there's about 10% of the population who own cars but can't afford to go on a week's holiday. There's about 25% of the population that are called malcontented motorists in her framing, which is a group that drives because they feel they have to, but it doesn't really necessarily make them happy to have to do that. So where are those groups? Where are those people? And, you know, car adverts aren't going to appeal to everyone in the same way, and neither should we.
Thank you. And then I have a question from H. Greg, do you collate details of those inescapable cliff edge changes that force people to change their travel modes, which can dramatically deliver a change?
It is one of the things we're really interested in evidence on. So if people are aware of studies, even small studies about what's moved people into or enabled them to move out of car ownership, that's really, really important. There's quite a lot of information about how many people own cars in different places. That's not the same as understanding what people need or how they respond to change. So we're really, really interested in hearing from people about evidence on that. There isn't as much as you might imagine.
I think it's something that I'm always a bit curious about is we talk about, because that's the data that's collected often, the numbers of cars per household. But obviously at any one time, if you have one car, then there's only really one person who can use it. So it sort of seems to inflate the number of people who can drive, you know, any one time. Is there sort of some, you know, yeah, and we're never really counting children really moving around much at all. Is there something around that we need different data?
Yeah, we've hardly found any papers on understanding the intra-household decision making around both the number of cars that need to be owned and also how they're accessed within the household. We collect a lot of information which is allegedly about households, but it's answered by individuals. And I think this is going to be a really important part of trying to understand, you know, because this system might work for households, for example, who've got 2 cars at the moment and could quite happily go down to 1 if the few pinch points could be tackled. But we really need to understand that. You know, what is it about those things going on within the household that mean there are 2 or 3 periods in a week or a month that mean people have decided they need 2, and then once they've got 2, they start doing all sorts of other stuff that they otherwise wouldn't really feel that they needed to in the way they currently do with a car. So yeah, it's really, this household question is really, really important, and also for us, street level and neighborhood level interactions, because a lot of this is about potentially finding ways to share assets within community spaces. We need to understand trust. We need to understand the extent to which people might have, you know, meaningful peer groups within meaningful spatial areas that enable them to share, and start using the pro-social kind of opportunity that this would bring with it. Better neighborhoods, better social interactions within neighborhoods could be one of the outcomes that people are looking for, or it could be something that closes it down in some places.
Yeah. Thank you. And Ruth, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Fascinating. A couple of things, and it is a question, but I noticed one of the streets in your very first 5 photographs where it's cars parked on both sides. And, you know, in the Netherlands where I go a lot, the equivalent would have A, be one way, but B, be right of way for walking and cycling. So, you know, drivers would give way to anyone who is cycling, which makes it a different feel. So it makes people more encouraged to get on the bike or walk. But I just wondered if you have any view on the correlation between cars now are, you know, they're good suspension, their stereo equipment, they're a place to put your coffee cup, your water, your everything, in the same way that mega buggies are now. So we know that there's a problem between buggy users and wheelchair users on buses. I'm old enough, we used to use a fold-up McLaren, and I also had a horrible car that wasn't terribly comfortable. So it was better to go out on foot with my son than get in the car. But do you feel that cars now are just so comfortable and they are the sitting room on the move, and that's why it's even more difficult to get people out of them, possibly?
I would say cars are getting better, and I think that's a challenge for anyone thinking about travel behavior change. My experience of electric vehicles is they're much easier to drive and much nicer to drive than petrol cars, and they're also generally lower maintenance. I mean, I've got some issues with them, and I didn't show a slide about gully charging and all of the challenges that there would be around electrifying our terrace streets, which I think is a real issue. So cars are getting better, and that is why I think our system that we're thinking about, we never talk about car free. It's about what the right level of car ownership or car access would need to be in an area for people to use cars when they need to. I mean, so that statistic that I suggested, it's something like 90% of journeys, I think, that are under 35 miles in length. Those are the ones that are most amenable in general. They're not always possible, but in theory, you're looking at public transport being potentially competitive for many of those. And obviously the very small journeys, walking and cycling, is competitive. But about 1/3 of our miles are driven in these trips that are longer than 35 miles in length. And only some of those are good for rail. So we have to recognise people will need cars for some things. And even if you're not a car owner, you're still dependent on cars in some way in your life. So the question is, how do we provide that? And so people can have access to the comfortable vehicle, or the one, if they've got the difficult journey or the time of night that it's not serviced by something else, it's available. And I think it's trying to work out, I guess, the part of the question you're asking about comfort is, will people give up their own space where they can just chuck their crisp packets or have loads of dog hairs, or that stuff? It matters, and we've got to understand that.
Great. I'm just going to take a couple more questions from the chat, and then we'll return to the in-person ones. So Andy asks, how much impact has emissions law derogations, i.e. larger vehicles can have higher emissions, had on the creeping trend for massive vehicles?
Well, this to me is like the biggest wasted climate opportunity that we've had. 20 years ago, super minis were the most popular category of car that was sold. And now it's SUVs, and we've consciously allowed that to happen. And if we hadn't, we wouldn't have the same carbon gap. We wouldn't have the same demands on behavioural adaptation in society that we have today if we're ready to take the carbon target seriously. So there's all sorts of things which have undermined the kind of the purchase of lighter vehicles, and taxation system's been at the heart of that. And I think just fiddling with VED is it's a relatively easy thing to do. But if you're going to do that and allow for real-term falls in the cost of motoring, you're really not going to have that much impact. And when you're buying a car, first-year VED is often wrapped into the price, which is wrapped into the finance, so you don't even see it anyway. So yeah, there's some real gaps the government's not really willing to take on vehicle manufacturing. That's a sad reality, but I don't think it means that we can't build systems which have cars as part of them, but just not everyone owning their own car. So I don't think it undermines the potential of this kind of approach.
And Mark asks, what city in the UK, Europe, world is the nearest model, do you think, of success?
It's a really good question. I don't think I could point to a city. I think I could point to communities. I could point to areas of cities where people have introduced more innovative sharing processes. But even like if you look at the Netherlands per head of population, the carbon emissions from driving are higher than they are in the UK. Partly because there's a lot of motorway-based driving in big cars. So it's not a guarantee that if we have really good quality urban infrastructure, if we don't also do something to manage the car ownership and car access, that will necessarily drive down emissions in the way we can. This for me is why things like right sizing of vehicles is so important. If our car occupancy average is 1.6, why have we always got 5 seats in a car? Why have we always got a 2.4 ton vehicle? I mean, I'm interested in the discussions on sort of powered electric motorbikes and powered bikes. There is an awful lot of scope for innovation in powered light electric mobility. We really need the government to recognise that potential and to regulate it properly, and to think about how that balance between bigger vehicles and really light vehicles that are using bike infrastructure ought to be managed.
Yeah, yes, definitely to that. And Roger, do you want to ask your question now?
Thanks. Excellent project, Greg. This sounds brilliant. What I wanted to question is whether the project is going to look not just at the people's ability to envision a future where they don't need to own a car, but to think about the process of transition. The reason I'm raising that is because if you like the constraint of finite space, the narrow street, where if you like the problem, too many motor vehicles either parked or moving, is in the way of the solution, more space for cycling, for on-street public transport, for shared transport, and all the rest of it. So those solutions can only tackle the problem once you've got rid of some of the problem first, if you see what I mean. There's a chicken and egg problem here about, you need to get rid of some of the problem before the solutions can work. And that is one I would suggest, particularly, the idea of car clubs on terrace streets with narrow wall-to-wall parking, where you can just imagine that some of the residents have a real difficulty, because every time they move their car, they've got to worry about, will they be able to park it again when they come home? And yet you then have to have a kind of community negotiation to persuade some of them to not own their cars and to believe that the car club is going to work. That's just a sort of specific manifestation of what you were talking about when you were talking about trust. I just wondered whether that's sort of part of the project to investigate those sort of dynamics.
Yeah, it is. So we've got funding to try and demonstrate the kinds of systems that people have described to us. Now, it might be a little bit Heath Robinson in that, we aren't going to be designing a system that's there permanently, but we've got money to, for example, buy people out of their car financing costs for a period of maybe up to 3 months if they're prepared to surrender their car to us. And they would then be accessing the system with the money they'd normally be spending on a car, but the system that they've designed. As part of that, we would hope to be introducing some temporary street experiments So if we can get enough people within neighbourhoods to participate, then we'll create some space on the streets. People will notice the space on the streets, and we'll start to be able to do different things with the streets. We're going to begin that process virtually. So we're going to start some work with schools in the new year and get the school children to design a system and to design what they would do with the space that's freed up by it. Part of this is really trying to develop some provocative but positive visions, and then try and find that way of delivering them, Roger. So we're definitely going to try and realize this for people, and also understand from that about the learning, because I think people are going to have to unlearn having a car outside their house, which is theirs, and learn something else. The question, I think part of the question is, having done that unlearning and learning and seen what else is around as a result of that, is that better for them?
Thank you. I've got so many questions. I'm going to give you a couple at a time here, and then we're going to come back to the in-person ones. Somebody's asked about, are the new towns a place to test this? And somebody else has asked how Kirkstall Forge development on the edge of Leeds is working out.
New housing potentially has, there's a lot that could be done with the sorts of systems we're talking about here. We are focusing on learning and transitioning existing areas, but be interested to connect to people if they have opportunities that they think we might be able to contribute something to. Please reach out on new housing. Kirkstall Forge, I don't know how that's bedded down. It's probably not, of the neighbourhoods that I know in Leeds, not necessarily the one that's closest to the kind of solution we might be envisaging. There's a couple of sort of co-housing type communities which have done a lot more kind of integration of sharing economy within their thinking. I find it difficult because of the way the insurance markets work and so on. They're doing it kind of in spite of rather than because of the system that's out there, and that's another thing that we want to change. But maybe I should go and check out Kirkstall Forge. It's an interesting one.
Thanks. Brendan, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, a comment and a question. The chairman of Renault Europe, I think, or was it globally, a couple of weeks ago at the Paris Motor Show, said that Europe needs a K car regulation, you know, the tiny little Japanese cars and so on. And I was at the International Cargo Bike Festival the other week talking to the Light Electric Vehicle Association EU, and they're telling me that there's very much consideration going on at EU level about changing vehicle categorization to create a light and small vehicle. You may be aware that there's the tiny little ones that 16-year-olds can drive in France. So, and I think that process was going on with the last lot until they got kicked out here around bicycles and so on. But really that needs extending to small golf carty things, which could play a very big part. But actually my question is more about the insurance. To what extent do you think that government could help to fix that? Because part of the problem, I once heard that 10% of people are willing to share their cars, some survey. That's all we need, really, in terms of, you know, virtually everybody having access to a car. If we could have peer-to-peer insurance, not through the car clubs, which, as you said, were stupidly expensive, but just to be able to share among a small group of, you know, 10 or 12 neighbours or something, that would revolutionise quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, we are working with Cover, who you may have heard of, that do by the hour insurance. But more generally, our work is trying to look at these system level questions. So in a world where it was normal to not own your own car, then insurance wouldn't be a headache, right? And yeah, I don't know, we might have a breakdown service for public transport use that came and sorted stuff out for you. But what is it that would go around a system where you didn't need to own your own car that just made that easy? And I think those are the kinds of questions we have to pick at each one of those. Why is that not the case? What is it in the market?
I guess what I'm thinking is it's protectionism by insurance companies who actually don't want this because it would mean less receipts.
Yeah, I suppose that's potentially the case, but I'd say Cover obviously they are thinking about this as as an alternative. There's always someone else who sees it as an opportunity, maybe. So
Great. Andy, I'll take your question now. Andy, yeah, easy there.
Hello. Yeah, I was looking at some stuff for a meeting I was at the weekend, and it seemed to me that we had, in terms of car ownership particularly, a sharp increase towards 2014, and then the rate seems to have dropped, and it seems to have been about the time that e-cars started arriving. So I wondered whether there's something about an opportunity there, but also in terms of generations, whether you're seeing the younger generation in Leeds perhaps taking more of an opportunity. Is it something that we need to live with a lot of the flack, and I get a lot of personal flack about sort of the older generation who couldn't possibly live out their cars, and the younger generation who are prepared to accept alternatives and mobility as a service?
yeah, we will definitely be looking at the kind of cohort effects here. I'm not sure it's as simple as younger people are less interested in cars. I think it can be quite context dependent. Where there are not many alternatives, then people don't aspire to not be able to get around. So I think in particular, like rural communities, you don't find the same trends that you do in urban areas. But I think questions of affordability, insurance and so on, if the longer people spend learning an alternative system to the one which is individual ownership, I think the more likely this is to be workable and growable. So it's definitely a demographic we're interested in understanding more.
Thank you. I'm going to take another couple from the chat, and then we'll come back to the in-person questions. Denise asks, will you use exemplars to help convince politicians and perhaps track new low car developments through your 5 years? E.g. in York, the council is delivering very low car developments with community green space, play streets, huge levels of cycle parking, etc.
We are hoping to take people through with us on the journey. We've got a database of interesting interventions, so happy to take ideas of places to add to that, the kind of building good practice. I think we'll be producing a toolkit which will enable people to kind of use the things that we've developed to implement this. So hopefully that will be another way of getting outreach. And we will be doing lots of site visits, case studies, trying to involve people with listening to the voices of the people who've been involved in the design process. This to me is a really powerful thing. This is asking people to design it with us, not putting stuff out there and seeing whether they like it or not. And that I think could be quite powerful.
And David Cox asks, the segmentation is very useful. Is it published anywhere yet? Now, I think that Lynn Sloman writes about Gillian Annabel's work in CarSick, because I have a feeling I looked at it the other day. So I don't know if there's anything else that's kind of...
She's done a couple of publications over the years on segmentation. I think the original one is 20 years old, and then there was another one done on electric vehicle purchasing and so on. So I'll send those links over, Sally.
Yeah, thank you.
I put them in the chat.
Great.
I put snapshots of the data for the segmentation in the chat. So if
Brilliant.
you go back through it somewhere, it's there.
Yeah, because it is really, really useful, that work.
Should I put the link to the paper? I'll find it.
Yeah, if you can do that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, and somebody else, I suppose, relating to what you're saying, is saying this is brilliant. How do we get involved or contribute? And I'll just take one more question from the chat. In terms of who you question, do you see a role for involuntary non-drivers in this? Interesting but USA focused work by Anna Letitia Zeivarts on this.
Yes, I think we'll work with the Royal College of Art. They're really good on inclusive design, and a city where you don't need to own a car works for everyone. It works for people who currently own cars, and it works for people who don't own cars. And I still think, I think somebody put in the chat earlier, you know, I don't own a car, but I use a taxi quite, you know, we use cars in different ways, even if we don't own them. So thinking about how this package as a whole works is going to be really important. We have a deliberate design process, which is to try and find some communities where we think there's an opportunity to move away from more car ownership to lower car or zero car ownership and car access, partly because of how we're funded. But that doesn't mean we won't be considering everyone in that thing. And I would say I'll put the project webpage in the chat. There is a newsletter now that people can sign up to, but if you've got a specific issue that you want to talk about, or an example that you think we should know about, then there's also an email address that you can ping stuff over to us, and we'll gratefully look at anything.
That's great, thank you. Mark, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, well, it was just about links with Como. I mean, by the way, I've just put the original paper in the chat so you can follow it. It's quite texty. There are some better presentations which are easier to see from it. Como have done a lot of work, and there's been a lot of discussion on the in the chat about people personally sharing and so on. But the Como work is invaluable, and hopefully that's something, you know, you're talking to Richard or Antonia. But from the car clubs, the way it's worked really is that commercially it's a bit like small town bus services. Unless local or national government are prepared to commercially subsidise car clubs, somewhere like the Buxton scheme is just not going to work commercially. The only places it work is big cities, like in Brighton it's worked, but London and places like that, because that's the only places that produce enough revenue for them to maintain it and introduce the cars and keep the car fleets going, which are increasingly getting expensive for other reasons. So the smaller places are going to have a challenge without that revenue funding. So have you talked to Como?
Yeah, we're working with Richard, looking at their data, talking to them about their regulatory challenges.
Excellent.
Trying to work with him to get a broader definition of integrated transport into the integrated transport white paper. Yeah, my concern is it will fall along the standard departmental responsibility lines, and it won't necessarily see this integrated opportunity.
That's interesting, because for my sins, I'm writing or trying to write the Green Party's active travel policy at the moment. And there are people in that group who are trying to be very modally based, and there's no space for shared, because it's not a modal issue, it's a shared integrated issue. So I'm having the similar challenge on a very small, I mean, okay, the Green Party's not going to get into that. Well, we are, of course, nationally, not in the short term. So that challenge is repeated.
And now I think we've just got a handful of questions in the chat left. So if you've got time to stay on, Greg, then we'll.
Yeah, that's fine.
A lot of interest in this. Susanna says about process. You said you're looking for several hundred households engaged in testing ideas. Can you give an idea of what kind of projects that you'd hope for? Was it
so? I mean, partly, the cop-out answer is this is co-design. So the nature of the interventions that we try have to be the ones which we build with the communities. So we'll share with them the potential of all these different opportunities, and they'll tell us, I guess, which things they think might fit. Our job is then to work out, well, would they, and how much of it would you need in order to meet what people say where they say they need to get to. And then there'll be a bit of back and forth between us and the communities to kind of get to an answer that works for them but is also workable. So it is hard to say. We do know that I think sharing within communities, I think one of the points Mark was just making about the cost of car clubs, if you run it as an entirely commercial model with brand new vehicles, then you aren't replicating most people's experiences of owning and using cars. I mean, we do buy a couple of million new cars every year, but there's lots of people who are in the second-hand market, and their transport systems coordinated differently. So that's partly why we're looking to different types of communities to try and work out what would work in different circumstances, and not just dropping existing systems into those places.
Yeah, and I suppose related to that, somebody's asked about, are people too possessive about their cars? Is that, and you did touch on that a little in the talk. And I guess that's something that you'll be able to explore through this, people's attachment to their cars, how much of a barrier that is to sharing.
Yeah, I'd probably say there's no such thing as being too attached to your car. We just have to understand how attached to cars people are, yeah, from their perspective, and then that'll tell us where the change potential is. And we're not going to try and knock on the doors of a 5-car household that just is out there waxing the car every day. There's no point in going there. But we know there will be communities and groups within communities where this sort of thing will appeal. We've just got to work out who and where.
Yes. And somebody does ask, have you selected the communities that you're going to work with already?
No, we're going out on the 19th of November, where it's our first big public call to action, where we're trying to get people from across Leeds to engage with the general idea. And from there, we're going to see which communities might have most interest. We've also doing some background analysis to say, where do we think there's most potential for this to work? There was some research published by Uber. It was in the US and Canada, but it was put out today where they'd asked people to give up their cars, and their work showed that you'd need about 4 alternative options in order to have a mix of mobility. So there is something about picking communities that have at least got some meaningful set of alternatives in place, as well as access to shared cars. So yeah, we're still working on that, and we also need ward level councillor support. Now, Leeds has a vision, a written vision, to be a city where you don't need to own a car. I don't know how many of its ward councillors are deeply bought into that, but that convincing them with their communities is going to be part of the journey as well.
Definitely. And then I think this is the final question. This is a really good question. How can we communicate these ideas to a broader public? Could a TV program be made whereby a street of households are paid to give up their cars for 6 months and all try to share a pool, a range of vehicle sizes, and see what issues crop up and if people's opinions change over time?
I think we'd love to get involved in that kind of thing. I mean, that's essentially the experiment we're asking people to live, to work out how that goes. I don't know. Fly on the wall documentaries are a bit hit and miss for me, but I think we've got to try and have, this has to be like a public conversation, and try and make the positive alternative narratives a meaningful option for people to start talking about. Not about what we're taking away from people or what we're blocking or closing off, but what are we opening up? What are we giving to people through this new system?
Yeah, I think, and it's that breaking out of the bubble, isn't it? Sort of with getting it in as a sort of public debate, rather than just us. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to a bag full of hate mail as well, Sally. I'll just put that out there.
Well, I have to say, I think it's a fantastic project, and we hope that you'll come on again and share, perhaps as you go along, even how it's going and what your findings are. So just
thanks.
I'm sure everybody will join me in saying a big thank you. And thank you for all your great questions. So it just remains to say that next week, now I'm having to check, who do we have? Yeah, next week we have Lucy Saunders, Director of Healthy Streets, who's going to introduce the new Healthy Streets tool that helps practitioners and advocates make the case for better streets for active travel. We also have our very own Ranty Highwayman, who's going to give us the lowdown on the good, the bad, and the interesting. And he did tell me what he's talking about next week, and I've forgotten. Sorry. Is he here? Are you here, Mark? I think he couldn't come tonight. No. Anyway, it'll be a surprise. So I hope you all have a good rest of your week. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.